Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us virtually today. My name is Catherine Grinberg, and I serve as the Vice President of Public Policy at the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to day one of our Public Policy Outlook series featuring Minnesota. Before we begin today, I'd like to take a moment to thank our Chamber's public policy sponsors. Our program sponsors, Microsoft, More Engineering, and Primacy Strategy Group, and our supporting sponsors, AE2S, Beverage Wholesalers, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota, Bremer Bank, Cass County Electric Cooperative, Essentia Health, First International Bank and Trust, MWC Advertising of Fargo-Moorhead, Sanford, and Excel Energy. Thank you to all those companies for sponsoring the Chamber's robust work in public policy and advocacy. The Primacy Strategy Group is the presenting sponsor of this summit, and their policy experts are moderating this session. Thank you, Primacy, for this great collaboration. So I'd now like to turn it over to Kurt Zellers with Primacy Strategy Group, our presenting sponsor for this Policy Outlook series. Kurt is the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for PSG. He served in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2003 to 2015, including serving as Minnesota's 57th Speaker of the House. I'll turn it over to you, Kurt, now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And thank you everyone for logging in, especially our timing was impeccable. The snow, the cold, the blowing, just as winter hit, we did a virtual panel. We'll do the next one in person because we know we're hardy Northerners, so we're not gonna let a little bit of snow and wind get us down. But thank you again, Catherine, and Primacy is very proud to be presenting sponsor of this series, and I'm excited to moderate today's panel. This afternoon, we will kick off the event with a panel of Minnesota's District 4 legislators. Following the panel, I'll be joined by Governor Tim Walz for some brief remarks and a couple of quick questions if we can get them in. And then following the governor's remarks, I'll follow up with our legislators, any questions that may have come up from his discussion, as well as some of their closing remarks. Just a note so that as we're going through today, if you have any questions throughout the event, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So that's down at the bottom there, you can see it. And then we'll put them in there. I'll see them and then be able, if it didn't hit the topic while we were discussing it, I'll make sure and ask the question to our legislators. Now, to get started with today's event, I have the pleasure of introducing our distinguished panel. And we are just for, to start off, Representative Keeler will not be able to make it. She had an unexpected event come up, so she is not able to make it today. However, we have Representative Marquart and Senator Eakin, who I know have lots of extra things to talk about. So we'll be able to, we'll probably go over time anyway, but we have two great representatives, legislators who are going to be able to help us out. First, Senator Kent Eken, who represents District 4. He currently serves the Senate minority as the Senate Minority Whip and the ranking minority member on the Senate Aging and Long-Term Care Committee. He also sits on the Senate Agriculture and Rural Development, Finance, and Policy Committee. Senator Eakin is currently serving in his third term in the Minnesota State Senate after serving 5 glorious terms in the upper body, also known as the Minnesota House. He was first elected in 2002. And then also I'd like to introduce my friend Paul Marquart. Representative Marquart serves in District 4B, I almost said 3B, 4B currently. He serves as the chair of the House Tax Committee, also serves on the House Education, Finance, Property Tax Division, and the Ways and Means Committee, as if he had anything else to do as a tax chair, but Ways and Means will add a little bit of time to your schedule. Representative Marquart is serving in his 11th term in the Minnesota State House. He was first elected in 2000. Welcome to both of our legislators for joining us this afternoon. And first and foremost, as always, thank you both for your public service. We appreciate you being here today. Just as we're getting going, I have a bunch of questions that are, no surprise here. This is our second session of the biennium, so this is supposed to be lobbying and policy. However, especially Mr. Chairman in the Tax Committee, you have the added benefit of a little bit of extra of coin in the state coffers. So we'll also talk about that budget surplus, which will be coming out tomorrow, the announcement. So we'll start with Senator Eakin, if you'd like a quick 60 seconds to say hello to everybody, and then we'll jump into questions.
Yeah, hi. Well, thank you, Kurt, and it's great to be with you today. I appreciate the invitation, a great opportunity to hear your concerns and questions, and great to see you again, Kurt. Had been my speaker by my last term in the House, so great to see you again. And thanks so much for being here.
Great, thanks. Good to see you as well, Senator. We made properly trained you before you went over to the lower body for helping them out over there. It's a heavy lift. Mr. Chairman, would you like to start off by announcing the supplemental budget bill right now, or should we wait until we get into the questions?
Well, I'll wait just a little bit yet. Speaker Zellers, I know you were always demanding, wanting a lot of action quickly, but it's not going to work that quick. But nice to be with you. And, we're going to be talking surpluses. And yet when you were the speaker, it was just the opposite and in a big way. But we can talk about that later. But thank you for hosting. Thank you for the FM Chamber for hosting this event. I think it's really important that this is an important time of year, and it's coming up now with budgets and surpluses and the session ready to start. So this is a good time to do this. But thank you so much for having us on today.
Yeah, right. Well, and really appreciate you. The Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber covers a lot of area, and the search area that you guys represent is also a big area. So we really appreciate you taking the time. So let's just jump in, like you said, with the bonding bill. Last February, the governor unveiled a bonding bill or infrastructure bill, depending on how you look at it, at about $518 million. That one didn't quite pass. In July, there were some stories about a $5.5 billion. That's with a B. I know that makes the chairman a little squeamish when he hears that much spending. But it was a wish list from state agencies, local units of government. Just if you had to prioritize here, what would you put on the list? So naturally, it's going to be a bit larger. And then there's some media analysis done reporting over Minnesota that there's almost $70 billion in needs over the next 20 years to address some of those infrastructure needs as they're starting to age. So just to start with you, Mr. Chairman, has the House begun to assemble? I know everyone's been out on a number of bonding tours. Has the House begun to assemble their bonding bill for the 2022 session?
Yes, they certainly have. And as you mentioned, they've been out and about on tours and so forth. And in fact, Governor Walz was in Dilworth last week to look at the Dilworth Fire Hall. So really appreciated him coming out. But, we had a $1.9 billion bill in 2020, which was the highest ever. And I really think that's where we should be going. Again, we should be looking at as much as we can do, because the infrastructure needs are huge and interest rates are still really low, and we can get some of these projects done. Now, the important thing is that, we've got a lot of federal funding, especially with this infrastructure bill that was just passed federally. We've got a lot of highway dollars, bridge dollars, water projects, broadband. We've got to make sure that we don't duplicate things like this, but we can bring them together. And how best can we bring a bonding bill together with what we're getting with the federal one-time funding to really get out there and make a difference in communities? But I think the bigger we can do, the better. But the House is certainly putting one out there. This is the bonding year coming up. Yep. And there's just a lot of good projects. I mean, even though it's a little thing in the big scheme of things, for example, the Dilworth Fire Hall, it's big to that community, and every one of those projects are huge. And, we still have flood mitigation. We still have all these things in our area to do. So bigger the better for a bonding bill.
Well, and I will come back and ask you, I was hoping that you would bring up the Dilworth fire station. I did read the article in the Fargo Forum, so I was hoping you would get to that. Senator Eakin, I know, being in the party opposite, or the minority party, this is the one time when the folks in the minority party have some say, because as folks know, it takes more than just a simple majority to pass a bonding bill. So the Senate will also have a bill. Wondering if you and your caucus have been assembling as whip. I know that's for those that aren't familiar with the political jargon, the whip is the guy that goes around, or the man or woman, I should say, goes around and talks to all the members and asks what's going on, what are their concerns. So you're probably either the most popular or the most hounded member in the Senate now with projects. So what does it look like from your side? And then as we come back, I'll also ask, and maybe you want to do this while you're at it too, Senator Eakin, is some of those local projects, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Chairman, as well, if there's any other local projects you'd like to highlight.
Sure. Well, and you bring up a good point, Kurt, about the minority having a significant influence in the bonding bill. It was designed that way because this is a very important bill with funding that goes all across the state for our infrastructure needs here. And so we want to make sure that it's a good, strong bipartisan effort that's being put forward here. And I agree with Representative Marquart in terms of the size of the bonding bill. We kind of broke through a psychological barrier we've had for over a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
We've been stuck at the same level as far as the bonding bill is concerned, the same level of funding, and the costs for maintenance, for fixing, for building this infrastructure keeps going up. So we've been steadily falling behind. And that's one of the reasons that we have, over $5 billion in requests right now, is because there's been a lot of deferred maintenance over those years, and a lot of leaking roofs and old boilers and things that need to be fixed that should have been fixed a while ago. And actually, it costs us more in the long run if we don't fix those things early on.
Yeah.
So I agree with Representative Marquart. We need to make sure we have a robust bonding bill that finally digs through a significant portion of that deferred maintenance, so that we have more efficient operations moving forward. And as Representative Marquart also said, the interest rates are low right now, so we get a much bigger bang for the buck. And we have a number of needs in our area. Flood mitigation is one of the top priority issues for our area in the Red River Valley. And we're asking for funding again to complete projects in Moorhead and up and down the Red River Valley here. That's always a significant issue. And again, it's an area where we save a lot of money. It's estimated just in terms of cleanup costs and damage repair that we save, $4 for every $1 that we put in to flood mitigation. So that's a huge payback. And that's not even considering the psychological benefits of the peace of mind that people have, and bringing in more businesses because they don't have to worry about the flooding like they used to, and keeping people here in our community. So that's huge. Also, we have a project at MSUM for Weld Hall, a beautiful old theater, a real piece of history and a beautiful piece of architecture, to have that renovated so that we can continue using that and use it more efficiently, more effectively. Paul had already mentioned the fire hall at Dilworth, and here we're talking about real needs for public safety. So those are things that I think need to be at the top of the list. And also things like amenities like the Heartland Trail, which we're looking to get funding to expand on, which is good for our health. It's good for the economy because it brings more people in to our businesses as well. So it's good all the way around. And just having that amenity also attracts more people to the area as well. And we are the only region in the state of Minnesota that doesn't currently have a regional trail system completed yet. So I think that that makes for a strong argument that we need to get it done here.
Yeah, well, and that, I mean, you think of how many trails and road walking, biking, and hiking trails that we have around Minnesota, and I did notice that in some of the homework I was doing. I remember if it was one of your newsletters, you highlighted that, and that is something that we're proud of in Minnesota. And I got to tell you, in the metro area, you probably can't walk across the street without hitting a trail in some of our suburbs. So it is all fair. So to the and Chairman Marquart, just a quick rebuttal for you or follow up for you. Any of those local projects, obviously the Weld Hall and possibly the trail. Any other projects that you're focusing on that you want to make sure that the folks at the chamber hear about today?
Yeah, I think the only one that Senator hasn't mentioned probably is in Detroit Lakes. They're looking at renovating their historic ballpark, their kind of economic development, bringing people in. And so in the Heartland Trail is mentioned, but it'd be nice on this flood mitigation. Moorhead doesn't have a lot more to finish up. I mean, they've started, going back to 1997, and then that was kind of a year where Senator Langseth at the time did a lot for flood mitigation. Then in 2009, it really ramped up. But Moorhead has just a little bit yet to go. It'd be nice to get that finished off this year.
Yeah, I back in my days as a staffer in 1997, I was there with Senator Grams, and Senator Langseth made sure that he knew all about the flood mitigation that was necessary. So he did a good job of keeping his local folks grounded. So looking at some of the interaction, and that's really just curiosity wise, to both Chairman Marquart and Senator Eakin. Those federal dollars coming in, that, I mean, again, it's nobody wants to complain, especially after what we've been through, but that's a lot of money. And how do you balance, where those federal dollars are going to go? And then, could be upwards of, $6 billion, $6.5 billion. And if the forecast is, looks like it's going to be where it is tomorrow, we're 750 over collections already, 750 million, I should be clear. So there's going to be a lot of money there. And I know in the past, we've kind of, to your point, Mr. Chairman, we got over that, $1 billion number. So, cash for bonding projects is probably also on the table. Where do you both see some of that mix with those federal dollars? And, like you said, Senator Eakin, there's some historic needs out there that need to be filled. How do you balance all that money, but yet hit all those priority projects? I'll start with you, Senator Eakin, sorry.
Yeah, that I would say that I think that we need to, first of all, make sure that we are leveraging all the federal money we possibly can. And, some of this money that's dedicated for Minnesota, we do have to put some money into the game ourselves, in order to leverage that. And we certainly should make sure we're doing that we're providing whatever match is necessary, because we are a contributor state to the federal government. We pay in more than what we get back. And so we're not actually getting our fair share right now. This will go a long way to help address that inequality or the disparity there. And we don't want to be leaving any federal money on the table. And the state it looks like we're sitting in good position right now to have surplus funds to work with in that regard. The bonding bill, of course, again, can be used for those purposes as well, because the bonding bill goes towards infrastructure needs. So I think this is a very excellent opportunity that we have here in the state of Minnesota, because the needs are there. We have a lot of money right now to work with, but we have a lot of needs as well. And the needs do still outweigh the investment funding that we currently have. But this will go a long way towards, like I said before, digging through that deferred maintenance, making sure that we're maintaining and fixing the current infrastructure we have and expanding on it in a way that provides us with greater opportunity for economic prosperity moving forward. But these funds that are coming from the federal government, these are critically important, and they're going to provide a lot of assistance for our businesses and our communities moving forward.
Well, and before I go to you, Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up on that, Senator Eakin, those matching federal dollars, and maybe, folks at the chamber, they may or may not be familiar, but that match, which you kind of highlighted there, some of the state money comes in, and then the federal money, a dollar here gets you $10 from the feds. What have you seen so far from that federal funding on those programs? Is it going to be a lot of that, or will the money come in and it'll be at the discretion, my preference, of course, at the local legislator level, instead of having the federal government dictate that it has to go in these different silos?
Yeah, and we're still waiting to see exactly how much we would have to provide in matching funds. I don't think it's going to be, like a dollar for dollar. I think it's going to be more like, a dollar is going to leverage several dollars for us from the federal government, which makes it even more, a no-brainer that you don't leave that money laying on the table. That's a good deal if we can get, multiple dollars back for every dollar we put in. And again, address that disparity that we have, and the fact that we're not getting back currently what we put into the federal government.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, you've got, our surplus, your surplus tomorrow, maybe, 2 billion, 3 billion, hopefully even better, good news. And then, these 6 billion in federal. How do you manage that? And, to Senator Eakin's point about not knowing some of those matching dollars yet, have you started to kind of just lay out a roadmap or a grid to say, if we have this falls here, or, is it going to be, to Senator Eakin's point, a lot of these infrastructure needs that have been lagging for, a decade or more?
I haven't seen that map yet, but what I do know, but I do think it's going to be very smart and prudent for the state to really look at where, like with this new infrastructure package, that's going to be over $6 billion. We need to look at exactly where those dollars can go, because 680 million of it goes to water projects, water and sewer projects. And we know typically that's part of a bonding bill. Well, if we can spend that 680 where we want, it might take less pressure in those projects on the bonding bill that we can use for other things that we wanted to do. $4.5 billion out of that infrastructure bill is going for our highways. As you know, a lot of our bonding bill, a lot of times has cash for highways and so forth. Well, maybe we don't have to do as much this time, which leaves more money for other things we've wanted to do. I mean, that infrastructure bill from the feds is huge. I mean, when you look at $4.5 billion from the feds on just highways, we get about $920 million a year from our gas tax. That's 5 years of a gas tax for that. And, you talked about MnDOT. They have said we're behind about $600 million a year just for regular road maintenance. Well, 600 million into that 4.5, that's what, 7.5 years. So, I mean, it's huge. What is there? We've got to know where those dollars can go. And I just know and hope that our bonding folks know exactly where those dollars of the feds can go, because again, we don't need to duplicate. And if we have all these federal funds coming in, we can spend dollars out of whatever the finite amount is on that bonding bill on other areas. Maybe we can put more into flood mitigation because we don't have to put as much in some of these other areas. So that's how I'm kind of looking at it right now.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it's a good problem to have, right? You're going to have all this money, but I do think, and it's I talked to another legislator, said this may be one of our FDR kind of works projects moments where we can fix things that have either been on hold or maybe we've gotten half of it done or a third of it done. This can complete a project, and to Senator Eakin's point, $1 today is worth $4 in flood mitigation down the road. That for the business owners who, most of the folks who are on our broadcast today, those are real dollars that are going to be able to stay in their pockets, whether it's insurance costs, whether it's, flood, we're going to put up, dikes around our business and pumps, that kind of stuff. So really, really, appreciate that. And I don't envy you the task, but I do think you're all up for it. And I guess this will be the short answer question. Do you think, February to May is going to be enough time? Senator Eakin, do you think with the way the money's coming in and how fast you're going to have to spend it, will you be able to get it all out by May 1st or maybe May 20th?
Well, I sure hope so. And I think we can. I think we can. And we certainly, I think we've demonstrated in the past that we're able to get things done even with a divided legislature, working across the party divide. I think you'll see that happen again this time around. And we got elections coming up too, so people are going to be anxious to want to get back out on the campaign trail. So that might put some pressure on to get things done earlier as well. So I'm hopeful in that regard. It is a lot to get done in a short time, but things oftentimes it takes a while before the compromises break and things start to move forward. But when they start to move, they really start to move, as you know, and Mr. Speaker, from your time leading the House.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I know that the tax bill is always the last because they saved the best for last. But that's again, it's a lot of money to get through, and the projects that are there and have been there, and the process usually goes that you kind of get in the queue for a year or two and make sure everybody knows about you, and then later on where you can see some projects that normally would have to wait 2 or 3 years jump up because there's a lot of extra dollars. And do you share Senator Eakin's enthusiasm and positive thoughts that would get done by May?
Well, I do. Typically the first year of the biennium is what we call the budget year.
Yeah.
But next year, because of all the surplus and so forth, it's going to be another budget year for all of us. And, typically there may or may not be a tax bill, but I think for sure there will be one this next year, just because we're going to have a big surplus. And part of the deal is going to be a tax bill. So we'll either get a tax bill or maybe nothing at all. But that's why I think there will be a tax bill next year. But I think we can get it done. We've had other times, maybe we go into a small special session after May. It seems like that deadline is kind of where they first come up with the plan and they iron out afterwards. But I am confident we can do that. But we're going to have to come together. We've got a good record of, the only divided legislature in the nation, able to get things done. I think we showed that in 2019 and 2020 and again in 21. And I think we'll do it again.
Well, and as usual, perfect segue, Mr. Chairman. That supplemental budget was going to be my next question. with, a lot of the rainy day funds, the reserves, there's a number of these accounts that, unfortunately had either been tapped into because of tough economic times or just, the circumstances at the moment. What does a supplemental budget, and if you don't mind, Senator Eakin, since he's hot on the topic, I'll stay on Chairman Marquart because he's going to be the one that, honestly gets suspended right away anyway. So what, have you had any of those preliminary discussions, Mr. Chairman, on what a supplemental budget would look like? And, for our viewers, like the chairman said, the first year, your biennium, your odd numbers when you set your 2-year budget, only in situations like this where you're fortunate enough to have some extra money on the bottom line, in this case, quite a bit. And if the surplus holds at 2 billion or 3 billion, have you had discussions about a supplemental budget, and what would that look like in, the chairman's perfect world?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about a tax bill. We've had discussions kind of among the tax team and so forth, but not yet on a supplemental budget. But I do think that COVID relief and recovery is still going to be our #1 priority. I just think there are still, while overall the economy is doing very well, there are still segments like the hospitality and leisure industry that are not. I still think we have to focus there. We have to focus on those people hurt most individually as far as losing work and so forth. We still have to get through that. And then not only kind of the relief, but how do we recover into the future? It's going to be, we're looking at probably different workforce. I mean, a lot more at home, just a lot different. Right now, when you look economically, Mr. Speaker, at things is we've got 10 job vacancies for every 7 workers available. Yeah. And that was the same actually before COVID as it is now, which is completely opposite when you have a recession at 7 or 8 jobs per vacancy. And so we've got a real workforce shortage, which has to be addressed. And I think we need to double our efforts on workforce training, because right now, a lot of people are unemployed. They're not matched for the job skill that is available. And, our career academies in our high school, that's the way to look at. We've got to really just look at everything and be creative on getting people trained. And then we've got to continue to look at how to move more people into the workforce. I mean, baby boomers like myself, we're retiring and we're not being replaced by enough folks. And
you don't need to retire yet. You got plenty of,
and, we know the productivity won't be what what I did, of course, or our generation. So we have to look for more numbers. Just kidding with that. Yeah. But I mean, it is a big concern. So this COVID is still going to be big when we look at kind of things and, all those things, childcare and economic development, and how do we deal with frontline workers who have, sacrificed extra. A lot of things we've got to consider yet.
Yeah, Senator Eakin, again, there are worse problems to have. I'm sure there's lots of other states that would like to be in our shoes, but what has there been any discussion in your caucus as well about what a supplemental budget would look like? Have you whispered a couple of ideas in the governor's ear? I can ask him when he comes on if he's got all the things you laid out for him. But are there things that you're thinking about and your members are thinking about from a supplemental budget standpoint?
Yeah, and I think the governor and other legislators are aware of the fact that I've focused a lot of my attention on long-term care and healthcare needs. And I think we need to focus a lot of effort on trying to address the worker shortage in nursing homes and in hospitals, which the pandemic has obviously made even worse, significantly worse. And to the degree that the governor is, even issued emergency plans for the National Guard, to get out and to help alleviate some of the workload that's out there. And that's just a Band-Aid measure, but we need some significant long-term investments and fixes to these problems, because this really goes to the heart of our quality of life in Minnesota. So I think that's got to be a top priority issue. That's certainly something that's getting a lot of attention and discussion in the governor's office and also in the legislature, and will continue to do so, and in our caucus especially. So, and Representative Marquart had mentioned too, talking about helping out the businesses that were hurt during the pandemic here. and are still many reeling from that. Some unfortunately didn't even make it through that period. So we've got a lot of work to do on that front, and that includes, more than just direct assistance or property tax relief. That's something else that I think we need to be looking at. But Representative Marquart did also mention things like daycare, making sure that the daycare services are out there so that the workers can find the daycare that they need, and the businesses can find the workers that they need. Housing also, making sure that we have the housing out there that's so critically important for the workforce. So those are some of the things that I think we can look at now that we have this surplus funding. It is nice to have. I'd much rather have this problem than have the problem of a deficit in reverse. Although one thing I've also noticed is that sometimes the discussions can get even more intense, and because you're fighting over this pie of money, expectations are much higher when there's a surplus, because everybody now thinks everybody's trying to get their share of it. Whereas when there's deficits, obviously there's lower expectations. People are just hoping not to get cut. But all the expectations go through the roof when it's a surplus.
Yeah, during the deficit times, they avoid you. Like it's the strangest thing. I had no friends, it's until we did the bonding.
Right, it's keep your head down.
Yeah, I couldn't find Jim
Mr. Speaker, if I might add on supplemental, we tend to talk just about spending, but I think, as I think Senator Eakin alluded to, I think tax cuts certainly have to, responsible tax cuts, property taxes, there's a lot of shifts still out there that we could pay back, get our budget in better shape. So with a budget surplus like this, tax cuts have to be part of the mix also.
Well, and again, I promised the viewers, this is not a setup. We did not do this on purpose. We didn't call each other before. Now, Senator Eken and Representative Marquart and I do share farm kid mentality. So we are, in common sense like that. But you led right into my next question, Mr. Chairman, especially for the business owners. In the next couple of weeks, Minnesota will be getting their employers will be getting their 2022 unemployment insurance payroll tax rates. And this is right to your point, Mr. Chairman. The UI trust fund is currently at about a 1.1 billion in deficit, which, during what we've been through, I'd be shocked if it wasn't, at least that, if not more. But and it's accruing interest in the amount of about 2.3% rate. And then it needs about a nearly $2 billion surplus per the Department of Labor solvency standards. So absent any action, I should say, from Minnesota policymakers to infuse funds, the trust fund, Minnesota employers will be assessed some pretty steep payroll taxes. As both of you had said, this is a tough time, especially for that hospitality industry. And in order for us to pay off the federal UI obligations and replenish that fund, what little bit of research I was able to do, I found, about half the states have used some of their federal pandemic relief funds to repay on employers, the unemployment debt, and prevent the increases on the payroll tax of the employers. So, Minnesota's Unemployment Development Office said, and this is just numbers again, nothing that's been official yet, but some of the tax rates would go up from 0.1 to a 0.5, about a 14% assessment. A number of these things that are in there, and the folks on the broadcast will know these numbers too. But just that's some of the background. Has there been any discussion, and do either of you have any thoughts about, using some of those federal funds to pay back that? Because to your point, Mr. Chairman, that is a tax cut for a small business owner. If that unemployment doesn't go up, the tax doesn't go up, that's a very healthy tax cut for them. So wanted to know if you had any discussion about that, and then where that's been in the use of some of those federal funds.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's something we're going to be looking at. Absolutely. You're right. The $1.1 billion that we owe, and otherwise rates go up. I think we need to do what we can to keep, the cost of business from going up, whatever we can do. So there's a couple areas there. Number one, there is this one, the rates on businesses. And there's also something I think we have to look at 21 again, is the subtraction for those individuals who received unemployment insurance benefits. And remember, last year what we did with the Paycheck Protection Program, because it was kind of related together in the tax bill with the UI subtraction, is we conformed for 2020 and 2021. but we only did the subtraction on the UI insurance for individuals for just 2020. So I think
Okay.
what that subtraction might look like, I've looked at the numbers. Even if we did the same thing, it would be about 2/3 of the cost of what it was before. It's not as much. So we've got to kind of, in my mind, take that as a package to look at how we can do that. But I mean, that's again, in the last couple of years in the tax bill, we've lowered the statewide property tax on businesses by $70 million a year. In 2019, it was 50 million just off the top. And then last year we raised that exemption from 100,000 to 150,000, which is about another $20 million a year. So, it's important that we try to reduce costs, especially when we're in these COVID times, but both for businesses, but also for workers who have seen a tough time also during the COVID-19.
Yeah, and Senator Eakin, exactly to Representative Marquart's, point, as the businesses are struggling through some of this just to get to this point, having that on top of it, really critical, as employers are having to pay higher wages, which, that's how the market works, right? If there's demand out there, workers are going to get higher pay, but, having that on top, that UI tax on top would be, a little bit extra burden for the folks on here. So want to give you a chance, Senator Eakin, as well, if you've had some discussions with your members about that, the UI as well.
Sure, we have, and we certainly understand that something needs to be done there. I mean, this is a huge cost increase that they would have to incur as a result. And so I do think that, we should be looking at the use of ARPA funds for this. I mean, many states, as you said, Kurt, many states have been doing that. So this certainly is a perfectly legitimate reason or use for these funds. Now, I think that one thing we should also be doing is trying to pressure the federal government that there is a consideration of forgiving some of this. So I might say maybe we shouldn't pull the trigger too quickly. We don't want to pay something off and then find out it could have been forgiven later. We want to see what the feds are going to do before we ultimately maybe decide what we do. And hopefully that decision comes sooner rather than later, because time is of essence here too.
Sure.
And we certainly want to be able to provide assistance as quickly as we possibly can. But I think we need to be putting some pressure on the federal government as well to forgive some of these debts that we have.
Right. Well, and that, like you said, if that surplus holds, and I don't want to bet any amount of money or my house, but but looks at the projections, there's going to be a nice, healthy, Christmas gift under the tree for both of you, coming into next session. I do want to get back into something you had started with, Senator Eakin. I'll go right back to you. Is the workforce issue, and especially in Greater Minnesota. We, down here in the Twin Cities, we see, our fair share of workforce issues, whether it's, fast food places not being able to be open certain hours, clothing stores closing at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock on a weekday. In Greater Minnesota, it seems to be even more exacerbated. So I'd like you to go a little bit more into detail about some of those workforce centers. And as a son who has a mother in a nursing home, and that nursing room shortage is in North Dakota side, but similar in rural Minnesota, that is a critical need. And as Senator, as Chairman Marquart and I start to move into retirement, we want to have somebody there to take care of us, because we can't be left to our own devices.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we want to have good quality people in those professions. These are extremely important jobs. And I don't think they're adequately compensated for the important work that they're doing. So this is something that we need to address. I think, especially now that we have surplus, is to address the long-term problems that we're experiencing there. And that is to make sure we're compensating people for, just in a just way, recognizing and respecting the hard and important work that they're doing. So that's one area that I think we need to really focus on. Childcare is another area, critically important to making sure that we have the workers necessary. And again, you mentioned it being even more difficult in the rural areas. We've been losing more of our family care providers, and in the cities, they've been able to replace a lot of them with these centers. The in-house family childcare locations have been replaced. But in the rural areas, that hasn't worked as well, because we don't have the population base necessary. You kind of need to have a big population base to make those types of centers work. But I know there's innovative ways that are being looked at to provide those services. I know in Ada, for instance, Minnesota, they have a child care center that's located in the nursing home, which I think is a wonderful way to kind of bring the generations together too. And to share resources and provide services more efficiently than they could otherwise. So those are some of the types of solutions we need to look at, but there's no way around the fact that we need to provide more funding from the state as well. I mean, they're really providing kind of a public service too, those that are providing these child care services. So I think the public sector, being the state, does play a significant role here in making sure that we have the child care services necessary for our community, for our families, for our communities, and for the businesses that depend on those workers. So, but there's a lot of other things that we can be doing. Housing, I mentioned that as well, critically important, making sure that the housing infrastructure is there. But we're facing some demographic changes that, that we're going to have to contend with for quite some time as the baby boomers. And Representative Marquart mentioned this, the baby boom generation's leaving the workforce, and there's not nearly as many workers to replace them coming up. So they're going to have to work smarter. They're going to have to, in order just to maintain the same quality of life or same standard of living, and to provide for those of us that are going to be needing, long-term care services down the road. And so that means training, putting more into training, making sure that we're providing every opportunity available for young people to develop their skills to the fullest potential so they can give back much more and be much more productive moving forward.
Yeah, and Chair Marquart, the hallmark of living up here in the Midwest, our relatives all came up here in the middle of winter and on this Homestead Act idea that if we lived here for 3 years, we could have our 150 acres. And they looked around on a day like today and said, yeah, seems like a great place. So we're hardy, we come up with solutions. Where do you see that skilled workforce, whether it's, in the laborers, whether it's truck drivers, whether, it's, on the other end of it, and the engineering and the computer technology, designing, some of the smart solutions that we may just not have the human capital to Senator Eakin's point. We just may be out of actual, physical bodies to do this. We're going to need technology. So what do you see coming? And I think there's even a job center, or a training center being developed there in Moorhead. So do you see things like that being critically important, and maybe also getting some of those either supplemental dollars, federal dollars, or bonding dollars?
Well, I was going to mention, yes, Moorhead opened up their career academy this fall. That's the way. I mean, that's the wave of the future, and and the state needs to be encouraging that more and incentivizing that more, because you're right. We've got not enough workers for the positions out there. But through a career academy, if before you graduate from high school, you've had the opportunity to learn a job set, whether or not it's nursing or computers or construction or plumbing, electrician, welding, whatever, it does several things. It gets you directly into the workforce quicker. And if you're from rural Minnesota, you're going to stay in the area because you've been working with these other businesses. So it doesn't completely solve the problem, but it does get students and people quicker into the workforce more directly, and keeps the rural people here from going to the cities and doing something else. And so I just think that it's a game changer in my mind, what Moorhead is doing over there. And it's basically for the county, although it's going to take a few years to kind of get that. But that's also putting my old education finance hat on. We need to revamp our finance system a little bit to reward these type of cooperative efforts where we're looking at getting workforce out there and training them and getting them into the proper skill sets.
Yeah, and you led right into the education question as well. As how do you see that working hand in glove with the primary education? As students are in high school, getting them at least a little exposure to that as a junior or maybe a sophomore, so they know, what, I'd love to go to Moorhead State, or Concordia is a great institution, but I really think this is the best career for me, and I'm gonna head right over. How do you see that working with some of the is that an encouragement thing? As you're both are current and former educators, how do you see that working in with the school system, to get some of the kids involved before, they get to the senior year and decide, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do?
Well, I'm guilty of it as a teacher. For the last generation or so, we've encouraged people go into the 4-year degree, go in the 4-year degree. And what have we wound up with? Job skills not being met and huge student debt. That's what we've resulted in. And so I just think this is what we really need to concentrate on, getting more into the trades, into these fields that are good paying jobs that are greatly needed right now. And, just for like the Career Academy, if we're going to bring counties together, there's going to be increased transportation costs. There's going to be increased teaching costs, bringing in folks, other working with businesses and so forth. There's just going to be some of these costs that are not necessarily in the formula or matching all these extra things, or even coming up with new capital expenses for these facilities. If you've got several communities coming together, boy, that's a no-brainer in these type of situations. I have just been sold on that approach of kind of being step one to get things going on this workforce training.
Yeah, it's Senator Eakin. I should have tossed that softball to you with the with the Career Academy. I knew a little bit about it, but wanted to give you the chance. I know you were involved in helping with that. How do you change? And I say this completely selfishly with a daughter who's a junior in high school, and yeah, I fully encourage her, Chair Marquart. You don't have to get a 4-year degree if that's not for you. I'd be happy to spend that money someplace else, but it's also maybe not the right fit, right? And how do we, to Chair Marquart's point as educators, how do you change that mindset of after at least a generation or two of go to college, get a degree, then you go get a good job?
Yeah, and I think Moorhead's done an outstanding job of addressing that and trying to make sure that students understand that there's multiple opportunities out there and different pathways that they can follow. And I think that's so critically important to keeping students engaged and keeping them in school. I think, unfortunately, because of the one size fits all kind of mindset that everybody's got to go to that 4-year college and so on, I think we've lost a number of young people from our educational institutions and lost a lot of potential out there that we could have tapped into. So I think this Career Academy is going to go a long ways towards keeping young people engaged because they have multiple opportunities available now. And we need to make it clear that those opportunities are available. And I think one thing we need to do as well is make sure we have, career counseling services at our schools early on so that young people can start early finding their pathway instead of spinning their wheels, for long periods of time and maybe not finding their way. It's more important now than ever because of, losing the workforce shortage issue and making sure that we want to have people getting on the right path as quickly as possible and getting up to speed and getting those skills developed to their fullest potential and as quickly as possible so that they can help alleviate many of the work shortage needs that we're facing right now. So I applaud Moorhead for what they had done. I know there's others that have done this as well, but I think Moorhead, along with some of these others, are on the cutting edge of what our education system should look like moving forward to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our students and of our communities and businesses that depend on those educated workforce.
Yeah, and I'm going to take advantage since I've got two educators here. I will remind folks, if you have a question you'd like to ask, Governor would be with us here in a little bit. But if you have a question you'd like to ask, there at the bottom of your screen, just down below, you'll see a Q&A section. Just type the question in there. I'll read them after I get my glasses. That's that aging thing, Senator Eakin. Get my glasses to read them. But I want to follow up on that because I think that is the critical important part. Again, I'm selfishly because I've got kids that are in that strike zone, sophomore and junior in high school. How do we incorporate that business? I told both my son and daughter, I said, here's the problem. Look out the bay out in California. You've got all these ships off sea that can't get in, so you got a manual labor problem there. But somewhere along the line, somebody didn't do something in the engineering and the planning and logistics part to figure out how to get it all in and then get it out. So you both have a choice, which side do you want to work on? But how do we get our students exposed to that? Because I got to be honest, neither one of my kids really, because it wasn't on TikTok or on Instagram, they didn't see it. How do we get the employers and the educators connected on that? So that, to your point, Senator Eakin, they look at what is a real job that's going to be out there. And this is why you're doing algebra or trigonometry. But, engage that employer, folks, for the folks who are on our broadcast today, get them connected to those jobs so that they know in 2 years, this is what you could be doing out there.
Right. And I think, again, the Career Academy is a good way of making those connections with the potential employers out there because they're going to be engaged as well. One thing we talked about is the need to have upgraded technology constantly at places like the Career Academy and other training centers because the technology continually changes. So, we can't be standing still. We have to constantly be keeping up. And I think that, the employers out there, they could be a big part of that. Of course, they're changing their technology all the time. Maybe the old technology that's no longer useful to them because it's outdated, but they still work, can be, used at the workforce, and just stay one step ahead all the time. But we have to, look at the continuing costs that are going to be associated with such training because they're going to be high. But I think working with employers can significantly reduce costs and make the system much more efficient, not just from the perspective of reducing the cost of the training, but making those connections and making it clear to students, what opportunities are available out there. That's so important. I mean, they got to know, where are the jobs located, so that they're not pursuing careers in areas where there's probably not much opportunity, to make sure that they understand where those opportunities lay.
Yeah, Chair Marquart, no pressure, but my son and daughter are hanging on every word. How do we encourage that new career that isn't the 4-year degree? But seriousness, not just, I think back and it's career day, right? That's what, as a kid, that's what I grew up, why should it be one day a year, right? I mean, how do we integrate that where it's career week or career month where, one of the classes that during their day, once a month or once a week is taken up with, here's a job in, X category, or here's a job in, Y category. If you're interested, here's the path forward.
Well, a lot of times with students, they have to experience it a little bit. And that's why I think a career academy, just here at Dilworth, Glen Felton, we've done tours. We've had students go over to the career academy just for tours. And we've got just a few kids this year from Dilworth going over there, but that's because they're trying to kind of work things out. But I mean, it's just, you're right. And a career day is part of that. We actually have a career day coming up here on Wednesday. There's 38 employers that will be in our gym that people can go around. But you have to be able to motivate, the student to be able to see things, because maybe you had a plan when you were a senior, but I remember at this time when I was a senior in high school, there wasn't much looking ahead till about a week or so, and that was about it. And so it's, it's just kind of a gradual thing, but being able to kind of look at what's all out there, and I do think as teachers too, we can't just be sitting here promoting the 4-year colleges, and I don't do that. I mean, we just kind of look at now, occupations, and in government we talk about workforce shortage, that there, and I think years ago there was a stigma that some of these jobs, unless you had a 4-year degree, didn't pay very well. That's far from the truth. The demand is huge and the wages are up there, and so it's a good living. You can make a good living doing all of these things. So there's no silver bullet to it all, but it's just kind of gradually getting students interested in looking ahead into the future. And that takes several different kind of exposures to different things. And a lot of schools are doing that, career days, going over to the career academy, so forth, and trying to stimulate students' interest in those areas.
Well, I hopefully the folks in the chamber here at least know, and if they're not one of the 38, you can call or email Representative Marquart. House.mn is the website, Senate.mn is the Senate website. You can find either of them. And if you have an interest, or if your business has an interest, or you have ideas, this is where, coming from the private sector and being in government, this was always one of my frustrations, is that it's hard to get both sides to talk to each other. So I can tell you, I promise you, Scouts Honor, both these gentlemen will not only take your call, but listen and actually put your ideas into action. So please give them a call. We have about 5 minutes before the governor is scheduled to jump in with us here. So I'll ask a quick question, and this one shouldn't take that long at all. What do you guys see happening in redistricting? Just in 5 seconds or less. For folks that don't know, after 10 years after every census, we do redistricting, and traditionally the districts in Greater Minnesota get a little larger, and the Twin Cities they get geographically a little smaller. But what do you see coming out of redistricting in the next session is when the map should come out. Senator Eakin, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I think, Kurt, like you said, usually the rural districts get a little bigger and the metro districts get smaller. That's going to be happening again. And I say unfortunately because it means we're getting less representation from the rural Greater Minnesota communities, fewer legislators from those areas. And this has been a continuing trend over decades now. Back in the 70s, it was pretty much 50-50 between the metro districts and the Greater Minnesota districts. Now it's more like 2/3 of the districts are in the metro, the Twin Cities, and only about 1/3 in Greater Minnesota, which means that our job gets a little more serious in Greater Minnesota as far as making sure that our concerns are being heard and being addressed. It means that we need to work together more than we ever have to speak with one voice to make sure we're being heard. So I anticipate that's going to happen again. Interestingly enough, this is the one Senate district in Western Minnesota that actually isn't going to be growing because we more than kept up with the increasing population. So actually, the 4th Senate district is going to have to shrink by a couple thousand. And so we're actually going to see some shrinkage here, but that's an outlier. And that's because of the growth that's occurring in Moorhead. Moorhead has been growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, Moorhead's doing spectacular, and so is Detroit Lakes. So the 2 population centers in my district have been doing very well. The last thing I'd like to say on redistricting, however, is that the current process is a rather cumbersome one in the legislature. We're the ones that are supposed to draw our own lines, which I actually see as a conflict of interest because we're drawing our own districts. And as it's been said before, we shouldn't be choosing our constituents. They should be choosing us. Right. I believe that, and that's why I've actually put in legislation to turn it over to a panel of retired judges who would be appointed by the Chief Justice and wouldn't have any, stake in the outcome themselves personally. Right. So, and that's probably the way it's going to end up being done this time anyway, because if you have a divided legislature, you're going to have a redistricting plan in the House that's quite different from the redistricting plan in the Senate, and you're probably not going to get an agreement between the two. And if that happens, then the courts have to step in. Yeah. Chief Justice does have a panel that she's already appointed that's already been taking testimony and looking at information. And I think they'll ultimately make that decision in February if we haven't made a decision by then, which I think is the likely outcome. And again, I think it's best to be done that way because there's ways you could draw those maps to benefit one side or the other. And it's called gerrymandering. Yep. It actually comes from, it was a Governor Jerry who signed a bill that had a redistricting plan that looked like a salamander. So they called it gerrymandering because of that. So I know that by having judges do it, a panel of non-partisan judges, that you won't have strange looking districts and manipulation of maps like that.
Yeah, well, and Chair Marquart, this is when Democrats and Republicans get along, right? I mean, this is definitely a rural, urban, and suburban caucuses all kind of formed together. And being a rural guy at my heart, I mean, it's always to Senator Eakin's point, you always worry that some of those rural areas are getting fewer and fewer voices and larger territory. I mean, some of the areas up in 1A, 1B, I mean, they're covering hundreds of miles where, my district in Maple Grove, is a few miles here and a few miles there. So, and to Senator Eakin's point, is that Iowa model of kind of the judges that pick it. And I remember after the time I was done, if you were in one part of your apartment, you were on the A side. And if you were in the kitchen of your apartment, you were on the B side. So the judges will fully admit this isn't what they do every day. So is it really the best thing to have them doing it? Why not have, some professionals that can look at it and make that balance?
Yeah, well, I mean, the rural will lose again, more seats. That's been the, what's been the trend. But I think as what has happened since 1970, the courts will do the lines. I mean, the House has come up with a plan, the Senate will be neither one of those plans, the courts will do it. And the third thing I want to mention, as Senator Eakin mentioned, for our area, there's going to be very little change because Clay County grew 11%. Statewide, the increase was 7.6%. So, and Moorhead's increased 17% in the last decade. Huge growth in Clay County, Moorhead, Dilworth. And so this district will stay pretty much the same. Moorhead actually might have to put a few people into the B district because I think it's 42,500 and they're at what, 44,000, I think 500 or something like that. So a couple
They'll be in
thousand might
capable
have to
hands.
move over.
They'll be in capable hands.
Oh yeah.
I want to thank both you gentlemen. We're not done yet, but Governor Walz is going to join us. So I'm going to transition and turn over to Moorhead Mayor Shelley Carlson to introduce him. Mayor Carlson was sworn in as mayor on February 18th, 2021 to fill a vacancy of Mayor Judd after his appointment to the 7th District. Mayor Carlson works as the Criminal Justice Systems Manager at Minnesota Elder Justice Center. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for introducing the governor, Mayor Carlson.
Thank you so much, Kurt. Yes, this afternoon, I do have the pleasure of introducing the 41st governor of the great state of Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz. There, can you hear me now? Okay.
If that was a lot of good stuff, repeat it.
Yes, well, and I wasn't done, Governor. I was going to tell everyone about how you're a football coach at Mankato West High School, served 24 years in the Army National Guard, retiring as a command sergeant major. And in 2006, you were first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Minnesota's 1st congressional district. You represented the district in Washington, D.C. from 2007 to 2019, serving on the Agricultural Committee, Armed Services Committee, and Veterans Affairs Committee. So everyone, please welcome Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And thank you, Governor, for joining us today and also for coming up to Dilworth last week, which the weather was much, much nicer. And I was really glad that I was there to meet you and support Dilworth's bonding requests for their fire department and Mayor Olson. So thank you. Turning it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. It was great to be up there with you and to see you standing with the mayor and making such a passionate and persuasive case for the area and for those investments. Really grateful. I did note it was much nicer. Everybody tells me they want to get back to normal. I guess 15 below wind chill is normal now, but it's a pleasure to be with all of you. President Full, great to be with you. Kurt, thank you again. Your skillfulness at being able to navigate policy and politics to represent the widest swath of folks is certainly appreciated. And to all of our business entrepreneurs and owners, just grateful. Every cliche has been used. This last year was unprecedented through grit, resilience, creativity, and just grinding it out. Many of you were able to make sure that you kept not only your businesses up and running, you kept people employed. Certainly glad to partner with you, whether it was on providing state aid, making sure we had conformity around federal programs, and then in investing in the things, our people, to make sure that as we come out of COVID and we look at what a post-COVID world looks like, that Minnesota is well positioned, which I certainly believe we are. I think our bordering communities certainly are too, because of those investments that we made. I'm waiting, as I'm sure you all are. Tomorrow we'll get our year-end budget numbers. I've learned you don't forecast that much, but I'm proud to tell you that I think in battling COVID, trying to protect not only the health and well-being of Minnesotans, but the hospital capacity. I think at the same time, we protected the strength of our diversified economy. I'm anticipating tomorrow may be the best budget numbers that the state of Minnesota has ever seen. With that being said, we need to make sure that we continue to lean into those things that make a difference, but we also need to understand folks who took a hit during this, and that's a lot of small business owners. We've got frontline workers that are still waiting to get some relief. And I think the good news is coupled with robust bonding packages to make sure that what the state is your partner or the federal government is your partners for our private businesses, that we're investing, whether it's rail grade separations, or it's making sure, as we've seen, I think so successfully, and I want to thank Governor Burgum and our friends in North Dakota of working on a diversion project. And none of these things are easy, and they're not without controversy, and they take thought and investment. And that's exactly what was in this room. So Kurt, I think what I'd like to do is just leave the bulk of the time for questions from you to let you direct where this is headed, and just being grateful to all of the things folks on this call have done. So I'll turn it to you, Kurt.
Well, thank you, Governor. And I really appreciate very kind words of yours as well. And on behalf of the chamber and the members, thank you so much for coming on. I know I would say, the second part of the biennium is the traditional bonding year, but I don't know if we can call anything traditional anymore, right? There's just there's nothing that is normal other than, like you said, the weather. 7 degrees, balmy, makes us remember that this is why our relatives all moved up here, right? For the lovely weather and the warm, balmy temperatures. So what we just want to cover, Governor, and thank you again for the time. The big things, like you said, the budget, some of the federal dollars that are going to come in, and thankfully, Chair Eken, our chair, oh boy, I gave him a promotion. Don't tell the new majority leader in the Senate.
Tell Senator Miller that.
Chair Marquart, Senator Eakin. Yeah, boy, I won't be able to get a call in over there. We talked about, that federal interaction, a great problem to have, right? It looks like there's going to be another bump in the surplus tomorrow when the forecast comes out. There's already been a good budget surplus. And then you got $6 billion in federal funds, at least that of now coming in, how to balance that. So that's, really what we're going to talk about. So, jump right into that. How do you see, that we were up in Dilworth, they were very thankful to see the fire station. How do you get into that interaction with the federal dollars, your bonding dollars? And as Senator Eakin pointed out, maybe you don't have to spend that bonding dollar here. You can use some of the federal funds. How have you been mapping that all out? Because it's got to be a monumental task.
Yeah, he's right. It is. And we're just getting more clarity. Certainly the commissioners, Anderson Kelleher over at MnDOT certainly is a big part of this, but this stretches across water treatment programs. And we made an emphasis on a lot of our federal dollars, that $2.2 billion that came in COVID relief. We prioritize that going to counties and cities. You're going to see the same out of our administration. You're going to see LGA, county program aid, be a part of our budget. But you're right. This is an investment that is a generation overdue. And just to, I talked about when I ran for governor, we have about $20 billion in backed up infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, water treatment programs, those types of things. Between our bonding bill last time and what's coming in from the federal government, what I think we'll have to do, you're talking a little over $10 billion that we can accelerate projects by a decade. And many of you who've been waiting for understreet projects, 11th Street, whatever it may be, these are things that we can get at. And again, doing it in a fiscally responsible manner. Obviously, states can't run deficits. We need to be responsible. We need to make sure if we're asking taxpayers that they feel like they're getting the best bang for their buck. So I think I'll stick to this. And it's the reason I was in Dilworth, listening to local folks on these projects, putting together a robust bonding bill, just like taking care of your house. It makes sense if you can get historically low interest rates at a time to invest. We'll keep an eye. And I was talking to some folks in the steel industry. They're expecting a 50% decrease in the cost of steel by next June. So hopefully, that's what we need to see. So this is all positive news. It needs to be collaborative. I think, as I said, Mayor Carlson made a passion and persuasive pitch for the things that need to be done. And there's some gaps in there, some federal gaps that didn't come through. This is where I think the state can do that, taking care of our workforce, taking care of our, the small business ecosystem that's out there. So it's good news. We're just getting our minds wrapped around it. But I think Senator Eakin is exactly right that in some of these cases where we were bonding or using general fund dollars, we'll now have the capacity to do. And again, these are not just the nice to have things. We're talking about broadband border to border, water treatment plants, roads, bridges.
Right. Well, and that's you kind of beat me to the punch. I think there was about 5.5 billion on a wish list that some of the news stories that came out in July while you were doing some tours, and I think it was 70 billion over the next 20 years. And to your point, this may be our FDR, great movement. Is there a priority? You laid out a couple there with wastewater and some of the housing, but is there a road? Is it going to be fixing roads, bridges, and culverts? Is it an interstate highway? How do you, and Speaker Kelleher will do a fantastic job advising you, I'm sure, but, is there a prioritization there, or does that kind of come with some of these federal dollars? And then would you ask for a waiver if you say, look, we're good on culverts, we need it more for intersections or overpasses.
Yeah, it's obvious that that you've done this before, Kurt. You know how they put barriers around us. Yes, I think so. And I think the flexibility we've seen during COVID has been really helpful. I think our priority has always been all corners of the state. Our bonding bill was equally divided amongst greater Minnesota as it needs to be. And with a recognition, you've got fewer taxpayers to try and support projects just like Dilworth. You can't raise property taxes on folks in smaller communities, and they have a right to have public safety. That's where we're all in it together. I do think that there's major safety projects that I would go after first. We know these rail grade separations. I just candidly say we finally got Highway 14 from Mankato to Rochester, and that thing's killed all neighbors from all of us. So I think it's a priority. And then I think it's especially for rural communities around water. These wastewater, truly, if you had to tax for a wastewater plant in some of these communities like Welcome or others, it's the entire budget. It's the entire budget. And this is where we're in it together. And I think the replacing of the lead pipes, and I've made this case, and I make it to all of you on here, we've been talking about border-to-border broadband for too long. Let's just finish it now. We have the resources now. Let's finish it this year. And that's the case I'm going to make. And I think, again, what's really, I think, fun for many of us on this call, this is bipartisan space where we all agree.
Yeah, well, and that's, we talked about that as well. Some of these projects, especially in greater Minnesota, have no political affiliation, right? It's what's best for the community so we can keep it viable, so we can keep the school and the church and the grocery store.
Yes.
And then that kind of leads right into where, Chair Marquart, the guy's going to probably have to get his spreadsheets out and figure all these boxes out. What happens with some of those supplemental dollars? Another good problem to have, to use some of those supplemental dollars for maybe some of these one-time projects that may be classified as a bonding project, but you know what, it's a road and we've got a little extra money. Is that some of those projects? And if you want to lay out your supplemental budget here today, I'll give you the rest of the time. I'm happy to.
We are still working on. No, your point, and I think, and again, I would say this to everybody listening, and this doesn't make everybody happy when I say it, but it's a reality. I'm open to all of it. I think that does make sense. I think we need to look at that. And I think you're going to hear the calls for, if there's such a large surplus, is there a place for reductions in costs? Or are there helps that we can do to small businesses? We've got a UI, the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund that we can tackle. The good news is we've got a lot of those opportunities. And I think what you saw, what I was doing in Dilworth is making sure that a community that's servicing 5,000 people is not overlooked. There are going to probably be, the Twin Ports interchange in Duluth. That is nearly $1 billion project. The whole thing needs to be done. But for the people of Dilworth, their fire department is just as important. So I think coming together, making sure that the voices of the representatives, and that means the mayors, the county commissioners, and those local reps that you hear on here, Rep. Marquart and Senator Eakin, and across the state. So this is a good problem to have. And I just think I keep stressing to people, we're literally looking at a 20 plus year backlog and growing at the rate we were investing. This lets us cut that in half over the next few years. And again, I know there's a lot of business folks out there saying that's fine and dandy, where are you going to find the workers? And that's part of what we do here. We invest in our human capital.
Well, you're just like Chair Marquart, you're leading right into the next question. I promise we didn't set this up this way, but the UI was one of the questions that we asked, Senator Eakin. It's about $1 billion hanging out there. And I think my little back of the napkin math I saw, about half the states are using some of those federal dollars and paying that back. Chair, God, I did it again. He's really going to be excited with me. Miller's never going to take my call, but Senator Eakin said, we want to be careful though, because they may forgive some of that. So let's not pay it all too quickly. So that's, one question, but it's about a 14% rate hike. So for your point, Governor, the small business owners, that'd be really tough. And then we talked about the Moorhead Career Academy as, training that workforce. So I know you were up there.
That's fabulous.
Hit both of those topics real quick.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we should be doing. And we're working private sector. We were out with the president at, Dakota County Technical of talking about what those programs are. And I think between that and the trades, they're making that happen. I agree with Senator Eakin on this, but I think for your business owners on here, just to be clear, we need to hold them as harmless as we possibly can in this. They've done what they did. UI was a fabulous, it's one of the smartest things we do. It's insurance. We all have skin in the game. It keeps your workforce in place in times of downturn, and it protects families and their assets. But we've got to get that thing taken care of. I think the senator's right. There's 9 other governors I'm speaking with that One of the things is once we get back to zero, if they can make some adjustments for us as we build that trust fund back up to it. You're right, we're about 1.15 or somewhere, but we'll get it. But I do think from the business owners who are out there, much like they said on Get Us PPP conformity, it doesn't do us much good to provide some support and then take it on the other hand. And in a time like this, I think we need to really prioritize that. But I think the senator's right. We're not quite sure how that's going to shake out yet, and we need to take a look.
Yeah, I mean, be prepared, but not don't overpay, right? So something really, kind of singularly focused on the Red River Valley, even down to South Dakota, is the deep concern with Moorhead business community and just individuals relating to the use of force law. Predominantly this concern is that North Dakota law enforcement officers will not be able to assist Minnesota officers due to different standards, and then, leaving some residents potentially at a higher risk. Are there any discussions, you're taking place? I know you've talked about this before, and I've seen some of the reports on the different standards. And then would you be willing to work with those legislators, the Eken, Marquart, and Keeler? Representative Keeler wasn't able to join us today, but obviously we'll make sure she gets a copy of this. But how to best handle that issue. I know it's something particularly interesting for the business owners.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those things, I guess, I don't know if it's the right term or not, but unintended consequences. A lot of our law enforcement folks were behind this because, of course, they don't want excessive force to be used. But we also know that when the legalities get in this, that you put officers at risk or you put first responders at risk, it makes folks have to think about it. And I want to note that Mayor Carlson has been engaged in this deeply. She engaged again Thursday with me on this issue. And just as we noted, I think we need to tackle this on all of our bordering states because this issue is not just North Dakota. It starts to go across to Iowa, to South Dakota. And the answer is yes, that we can get this right. I think, again, in the age we're in, everything is just such a false dichotomy. It's not about that we all can't make reforms. I think that as a teacher, we're always trying to get better. But we certainly know that folks are doing the best they can to get this right and to have an either or proposition. I want our neighbors in North Dakota to know if there's an emergency that you need us to respond to, our hospital capacity, or whatever it might be, we need to be there for you. And I'm sure the first responders feel that same way. But my guess is that, as the mayor and I talked about, they're being advised by their attorneys to be careful. And I think from a business community, safety is a top priority. And as I was speaking with folks at the forum, they were noting, Bill and the folks at the forum were noting, as the closer you get to Minneapolis, you start to see that there's improvements happening. There's community groups that we're investing in, and we're starting to see, things kind of settle back. Because I remind folks, going into 2020, Minnesota was listed as the third safest state in the nation. We're now fifth. That's unacceptable to slip. And one violent crime is too many, but we can't put things in place that make it more difficult for folks to respond. And so this is we'll work with the legislatures. I promised the mayor that she would be being contacted by Colonel Langer of State Patrol, Commissioner Harrington at DPS, and we need to have this broader conversation. But it's not just Fargo, Moorhead, it's, Winona, La Crosse, and others.
Yeah, no, it reaches across all. Just a little bit of time left, Governor, unless you're welcome to stay as long as you want. I just know I don't want to get in trouble with staff later on, so we can get you back. But just quickly on COVID, because I know that's also, unfortunately or fortunately, we've been one of the better states when it comes to vaccination and making sure that we have folks not only getting vaccinated but getting boosters. And you said you're not interested in reinvoking the emergency power. So depending on what the Omicron variant, whether how real harmful it is or if it's just very easy to catch, I think we're probably still looking at that. But are you reconsidering any of those decisions? And then with business leaders listening on, what's your COVID mitigation rules on businesses, because they're all interested in that. And again, this is that border city deal where you're looking at Fargo, Moorhead, just, so it's clear for us here, because I think, personal opinion now, this Omicron might be easy to catch, but maybe isn't as harmful, but maybe you're hearing something different from the Department of Health.
No, I think it's too early to tell on that, Kurt, but I think there are reasons to believe that. What I've learned on this is to not jump to conclusions and let the science go. What I would say is I understand the concern on this. And again, none of these decisions were easy. What we've learned in the last 20 months, that toolbox expanded greatly. And I just want to be clear, we have the tools to deal with this. And those tools are vaccinations, testing, and then the ability to keep our hospital capacity in place. And then just the things that, again, we haven't since June had any statewide mitigations. Certainly with the advent of widespread testing, that changes what we need. And I think the idea, again, I'm certainly proud that Minnesota ranks as a top 10 state in lowest deaths. We're second in booster shots. We're top 5 in 5 to 11-year-olds. But just to be clear, what we're experiencing is Delta, and it is dangerous. Our hospitals are still at 96% capacity. We lost a 16 and a 17-year-old last week, but I've said this for quite some time now. We have to strike that proper balance of realizing this is serious, it matters, it needs to be contained, but we also have to do that with protection of the economy. And I think tomorrow's numbers will start to show that. And just as an acknowledgement to the folks on this call, not all businesses were hit equally. And it goes without saying the hospitality industry paid a dear price just because of the nature of their protection of public safety around it. So there's at this point in time, some of those earlier tools that we used, they just, one, would not be that effective, and we have things that work better. I'll just continue to encourage people. I've ordered another 1 million of the at-home rapid tests to let employers know. And we've made it very clear that I want everybody to get vaccinated, but if you're not going to, at least test and let us know, and you can manage this. And I think that still holds true. I am hopeful. The numbers are still kind of sketched on this, that we may be reaching a peak in terms of the current Delta, but we've moved back up again to top 3 in, infection rates. And so this doesn't really care necessarily where you live. It doesn't care where you're at on these things. What it cares about is your vaccine immunity built up enough to stop this? If you catch it, are you able to keep from spreading it to someone else? And if you, God forbid, fall and break a hip or in a car accident, are you going to be able to get in the hospital?
Yeah.
And that's a real question right now.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your comments. If you can't get vaccinated, keep that testing up so you don't infect anybody else. Governor, I know you got another appointment. We really appreciate your time. On behalf of the chamber and their members, please come back anytime once we get to a point, maybe next spring. I don't know, after the bonding bill's done. You and I will hop in the car, we'll drive to Moorhead, and we can do it in person up there. How's that sound?
No, let's do it. And I just encourage all the folks on here right now. Now's the time to engage. You've got great representatives and senators on here. Business community, chamber has a voice, counties have a voice, cities have a voice. We're going to get to decide kind of a direction for Minnesota going forward. And like I said, I think the thing that came out of this was resiliency, grit, and a really good budget forecast. And that could have gone the other way. We could be in deficits, and we're not. So let's protect what works, strengthen what we need to, and take care of those who need a little more help. So thanks, Kurt.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Governor. Appreciate it. Well, thanks to the governor and then Mayor Carlson. We'll go back to our legislators, just quickly to wrap up on what you heard from the governor, and then any closing thoughts as we get ready we got about 10 minutes, about 8 minutes left here. So, Senator Eakin, congratulations on your promotion. I don't know that Majority Leader Miller will take my calls from now on, but that was at least twice that I gave you the promotion. So anything that you heard from the governor as well that, maybe since we hadn't had a chance to hit COVID, anything along those lines that you'd want to, share some remarks on?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kurt, and thanks for the promotion. I hope you can work your magic with Senator Miller. Maybe I could get a chairmanship this time around. But I was glad to hear what the governor had to say in regard to. I think things are, moving in the right direction. As far as the Omicron and so on, I know there's still concerns about different variants coming out, but I think we're well positioned to be able to handle any new variants. And as long as we keep pushing for people to get vaccinated, get their boosters. I just got my booster on Thursday, and it gives you a lot of peace of mind too once you get that vaccine. So I would encourage people to do that, because that is, I think, the most important factor in getting out ahead of this thing, staying ahead of it, and keeping it from evolving more into more variants. So with that, I was glad to hear that. I know Minnesota's been ranking high, but I think that's one of the reasons for that is just because we are a cold weather state too, which means people start going indoors during the cold weather, and things spread faster and further when the weather turns cold. So, the governor talked about what a good position we're in financially now at the state level. So I think things are really looking good. I feel pretty optimistic about our ability to get things back to normal footing and to help out our businesses and to make sure and to do all we can to make sure that there's a workforce adequate to meet the needs that are out there. And one other thing I just wanted to mention before we go is on the regulatory front, this is something I think we need to address and put a lot of effort into, is to, well, in our area especially, level the playing field, make sure that the regulatory environment is similar between North Dakota and Minnesota. And one of the things that we did in the last session was to work on frost footings to try to reduce the requirement for frost footings from 60 to 54 inches. And we didn't get legislation across the final finish line. We did get passed in the Senate. It was part of the conference committee process that kept the pressure on the department. And they finally put together a panel that included folks from this area. And they found that there is a way that we can reduce that frost footing without actually even passing the law, that it is not necessary to have the frost footing levels at 60 inches in order to achieve the goals that they were seeking. So I think that was a success story. There's still some issues that may surround the issue of whether it has to have the garage heated or not in order to lower the frost footing depth, but that's something that we're still looking at right now. And Representative Marquart carried legislation dealing with barn venues for weddings, which are getting very popular. And actually, my son just got married in one last year, just out by Rolog, the hitching post it was called. And these are wonderful venues, but the sprinkler requirements didn't quite fit for buildings of that vintage, those old barns. And so Representative Marquart was the chief author in the House on that bill. I was a co-author in the Senate, but we were able to get that passed as well, achieving some more regulatory relief that I think we really need to focus a lot more attention on, especially again in our area, because it has a much more significant impact along the border than anywhere else.
Well, and that leads me to one question, and I'll come back to you, Senator Eakin. Derek has a great question, I think, and Representative Marquart or Chair Marquart, I'll toss this to you. He said, we have seen tremendous growth in Moorhead over the last 5 years. Many times we get roped into a classification of rural. We are definitely urban with many opportunities for continued growth. How do we start leveraging the border as an opportunity, not a challenge, for the betterment of the state? And then he said, can more programs be opened up to our region rather than an ASK partnership with an expansive West Central territory, including Launch, Minnesota, with one host for the entire West Central territory, which it really does. To your point, Chair Marquart, you got Detroit Lakes and you got Moorhead, and then everybody else in there is kind of shrinking where those areas are growing. Definitely not rural under some of the classifications. So Derek's got a great point. I'll kick that over to you, Chair Marquart.
Well, I mean, I think what's happened in Moorhead speaks for itself. I mean, the work that they're doing there, you go up in downtown Moorhead, you can see the difference, the new housing that's going up, and it's a lot in Clay County. Again, Clay County is the 5th fastest growing county in the state. And so, I mean, I don't think we have to necessarily name or label us one or the other. We're doing our thing here. And I think people are seeing that. I was reading an article where Clay County and Moorhead and these cities were seen as kind of the shining star in Minnesota as far, especially just outside the cities. And so, we continue with border cities, and I think there's things we can do to ramp that up some more. Fargo Moorhead is a community. They both feed off of one another. I mean, lots of economic opportunities in Fargo, but Fargo also benefits from 3 colleges in Moorhead and the workforce training and the recreation in the lakes 45 miles away on the Minnesota side. I mean, it's not a one-way street here, and everyone just has to keep doing what they're doing, which I think is really good. And kind of with the governor today and with Governor Walz, and I've worked with him now for 3 years. And what you see is what you get. And I was really encouraged. He's been a big champion for infrastructure, and, he wants a big bonding bill. I heard him mention local government aid and county program aid, which would be music to city officials' ears. But, as I've talked to him even about the COVID, and he made a lot of tough decisions last year, and he cares about Minnesota, and he would talk about people dying, and that bothers him. And he also recognized the balance of, the businesses that are taking the heat. And as we've talked on tax bills, he understands that. And what's really nice is he's bipartisan. And when we've had these tax bills, we've had, last year alone, we had about $750 million of temporary tax cuts. But in the 2019 bill, by doubling the standard deduction and doing the first rate decrease cut in 20 years, we cut taxes about $250 million per year for individuals. And I heard him mention today, he's open again to reductions and so forth. So, open-minded, looking at what can happen. I think that's good that everyone, and I hope the governor sets the lead on this, that this year as we come into it, we look at everything. I mean, everything should be on the table. How can we help Minnesotans? That should be the bottom line. But again, thanks for organizing, and thanks to the chamber for hosting. Appreciate that.
Yeah, well, and thank you, both Chair Marquart and soon to be Chair Eken. Thank you both for joining us today. Mayor Carlson as well for introduction. I tell you what, we'll have her invite the governor up, mid-April to, put the final touches on the bonding bill, and then we'll have him in Moorhead with us. But really want to thank, and again, Chair Marquart, Senator Eakin, for your commitment to public office. You get a lot of extra hours. This last couple of years has been, I can't even imagine what it's been like. And I really want to thank both of you on behalf of chamber members and Minnesotans for your public service. It's a lot of time away and a lot of time that you have to spend on this. So we really appreciate that and want you to know that we appreciate your public service. That's it for day one of the Chamber's Policy Outlook series. Before concluding, again, want to make sure and thank Governor Walz and our legislators as well. Both the Chamber and the Primacy Strategy Group look forward to working with each of you in this upcoming legislative session. It should be a wild and crazy time. Lastly, I'd like to invite all of you to join us on Wednesday, December 8th at 1 p.m. for our federal policy panel, where we'll be joined by both Minnesota and North Dakota's congressional delegation to discuss infrastructure, energy, agriculture. Maybe they can give Senator Eakin some details on where those dollars will be spent. But we'll be, you can join us by using the same link and watching it live on Facebook. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock this Wednesday. Have a great afternoon.